I wish you could be standing here next to me, listening to the wind through the trees and in the grass, listening to the water lapping on the shore. This was my second day hiking on the island of Rügen. I stopped at a small camp near the town of Juliusrüe that is right on the Schabe Spit. It's a long, 12-kilometer long sandbar between two of the sub-islands of Rügen. In the morning, I then got back on the trail. The first part of it was a long, straight forest road that went on for a few kilometers. But by this point, when I stopped at this little rest spot, the trail turned over into this narrow, winding trail that ran right along the shore and goes through a few different kinds of terrain, a few different kinds of environment. You can see I'm walking through forests, but I also am walking through grasslands and at points through a field. It's a really interesting terrain. I really enjoy this part of the island. It changes fairly quickly between one of the various kinds of ecosystem. And all the while, to my right is the water. I don't know if you could see it in the very first clip, but off in the distance were a couple swans. And later on, by the end of the clip, there will be a large group of them out swimming in the waters. One of the things that was really noteworthy about this section of the hike, particularly when I'm going through the forest here, I don't know if you can see it, but every now and then you'll see the camera slows down or stops and jerks back or suddenly twists around or makes a sudden jump to the side on the trail. The forest was full of spiders, so many spiders. It was really something. Very large ones with very large webs, some of them spanning across the trail, some of them through the tree branches on either side, some of them with these very long anchors descending straight down across the middle of the trail, wrapped around a twig or a rock or something. But every couple minutes as I'm going down the trail, I almost inevitably would walk straight into one of their webs. A couple times, trigger warning, spiders, got them in my hair. One of them was on my arm for a little bit. I don't think they were dangerous or anything, but it was one of the things about this part of the trail that made it a rather colorful experience as I went along. I really don't know what it was about this particular forest that made it so attractive to spiders. There weren't any other forested sections on the island that were quite as densely populated with spiders in their webs. But for whatever reason, on this length of trail on the Schabe sandbar, it was just full of spiders. And I'm very sorry if you have arachnophobia, but there were just a lot of them. I should, however, not neglect to mention that along with the spiders, there were also some really excellent slugs that I came across on the trail. I've never seen any like that anywhere else in Germany. Most of the slugs I come across are either brown or bright orange, but these were jet black, just this really solid black color that was really impressive. So that part was nice. Aside from that, the wildlife was not really much on land. There were ducks and geese and swans out in the water, but other than that, I didn't really see too much. But once I eventually get out of the spider forest, I'm hiking for most of the rest of the day along either trails or roads that run fairly straight along the coastline. It runs from east to west along the top of the Schabe sandbar until I reach the next island, and then turns south along what I believe was mostly a normal road passing through a couple towns down again on the inland side of the island facing away from the Baltic Sea. That part was also through some fields, going through a couple small villages, and eventually to a small forest on the edge of the next town I believe the town was named Litzo, where I ended up at a small campground that was named after the Störtebeker brewery. But all of that comes much later in the day. The Shaba sandbar runs for about 12 kilometers. I don't get to the end of it until shortly after a really intense rainstorm clears up at about 1300, about midday. So that's where I stopped to eat lunch and let my gear dry out a little bit. And after that, once I get to the next island, I'm running on the inland side. That's the western side of the island along the coast for another 11 to 12 kilometers. I got to camp at about 3 in the afternoon, I think. And in between, like I said, there were some fields and some villages and a couple parks and bike paths and a few other surprises along the trail. But all of that takes quite a while. This is one of my longer days along this hike. The first day it was only about 11 kilometers, 11 or 12, I think. This day is, 22 or 23 kilometers. So it ended up being quite an increase in distance. The next day after this is much longer, It's another 24, and I think the last day ended up being something like 35 kilometers. That was quite a bit for me. But this is already starting to be a more intense long-distance hike. So it's going to be a bit before I finally get to my destination. Along the way, though, there is one other thing about this trail that I'm noticing as I'm walking along here. And as you can see on this section, it's kind of tucked in between a few different spaces. On my left are some fields that are clearly part of somebody's farm or pasture. And on my right is this coast of marshland, but in between is this narrow space that feels like it's kind of a forgotten patch of ground. But if you notice on the ground, it's clearly been cultivated. Somebody is clearing the brush and keeping the trail free for travel. So while it feels like it's sort of a forgotten space, it's not. Somebody is managing this to keep it as a passable trail. And I think that's a really interesting aesthetic, that you're kind of walking along a path that's tucked in between a bunch of other more clearly defined spaces. It gives the trail this sort of in-between feeling. But I think that's probably enough for talking about my second day on the trail. As I come down here to the ground at level with the water, as you can see out over the water, that haze off in the distance is some gathering clouds that will eventually turn into a fairly heavy rainstorm in about half an hour. Once that rainstorm hit, I packed away my camera and didn't shoot any more video for the rest of this day. I did take a few more pictures. I've posted them on my travel log on my Substack page that's linked down in the description. You're welcome to go see some more of that, and also a few more descriptions of some of the things I found along the way. But other than that, I think I'm going to leave this day's video here, and I will pick up again on the trail tomorrow morning when I make my way across the main island of Rügen. That ended up being a fairly easy hike, but had a few interesting things that I'll share with you then. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.